Welcome to Chanel World Story, Chanel that always discusses the history of countries in the world. On this auspicious occasion, Chanel World Story 22 will discuss about forced labor during the colonial period of the Dutch East Indies and Japan. Forced labor that makes Indonesian people suffer is called forced labor and Romusha. All the products of the earth in Indonesia were transported by the colonists for their war purposes. Indonesian people are really oppressed and treated inhumanely. Then what happened to forced labor during the colonial period of the Dutch East Indies and Japan? Until when the colonization lasted in Indonesia. Before proceeding to the discussion, please support us by liking, commenting, subscribing and sharing, so that this channel can continue to grow. During the colonial period of the Dutch East Indies and Japan, the people of Indonesia experienced a painful tragedy. When the Dutch East Indies and Japan controlled Indonesia, Indonesian people were forced to work for the interests of both countries. People receive cruel treatment. Forced labor is known as Rodi and Romusha labor. Working Rodi, meaning of working hard labor, forced recruitment of manpower in the construction of public facilities and infrastructure during the Dutch East Indies rule, is called working hard work. The system of indentured labor occurred during the colonial period of the Dutch East Indies. Bonded labor makes Indonesian people miserable and casualties. Forced labor is also called slave labor that is done under pressure by a relatively large group or the government. Rodi work has existed in various countries for a long time, such as during the Nazi regime in Germany or in the Soviet Union. In that regime, many people who were suspected of being opposition or national were arrested. They are also forced to work under severe pressure. In Indonesia, the Indo-Dutch era laborers were quite famous when they built a highway of approximately 1,000 kilometers from Enia to Panarukan in 1809. Beginning of forced labor in Indonesia was pioneered by Governor-General Herman William Daendels. Daendels came to Indonesia on January 1, 1808 after receiving an order from the Dutch King Louis Napoleon. Daendels was sent to Indonesia to defend the island of Java from the British threat. To defend the island of Java, Daendels made various efforts, such as building weapons factories in Semarang and Surabaya. And two Daendels roads in Java Island, then build a highway from Enia to Panarukan, and build forts for defense. In addition to forced labor, Daendels collected money from the people by selling land products at low prices and carrying out policies that burdened the people. Many people lost their lives during forced labor, making the people miserable. The people have to work hard by constantly digging rocks to make roads. Workers actually earn wages, but this wage is corrupted by local rulers. The workers are miserable because they have taken action beyond the limits of humanity. The process of building the road from Enia to Panarukan in 1809 cost 12,000 lives. Thousands of workers lost their lives in the period of forced labor, after two stages of development. Previously, normal construction work was done, then the company's engineering team continued. The forced labor was carried out after the company ran out of money to pay the soldiers and professional workers. Military involvement was previously chosen by the Dutch East Indies government. Because the road that was built passes through hills and rocky mountains, so it needs equipment like cannons to level it. The construction of a road that connects the west and east of Java to meet the interests of military defense only. The development of this road also serves to fulfill economic interests. Because Daendels instructed the residents to start intensifying agriculture by rejuvenating plants in order to increase income. The existence of roads that have been built means that the transportation of various commodity products from the interior to the coast is getting smoother. In addition, it functions as a communication that at that time was felt to be very useful. Romasha work occurred during the Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945. Similar to forced labor, Romasha also made people suffer and many people lost their lives. In the Big Indonesian Dictionary KBBI, Romasha are people who were forced to work hard during the Japanese occupation. Awal Romasha, the beginning of Japan's arrival in Indonesia, was welcomed by the people and freedom fighters, because it is considered helpful in expelling the Dutch colonialists. But Japan is cunning and cruel. Japan mined the natural resources in Indonesia and used them to finance the war. The territory controlled is quite large, making Japan need a large force. Energy is needed to build defense forts, emergency airfields, underground buildings, highways, and bridges. Labor force is taken from Indonesian population and distributed to various regions. Many Romasha workers are in miserable conditions and have lost their lives. Romasha workers are not only men, but also women who are used as entertainment workers. In 1943, Romasha was increasingly exploited by Japan, who lost the Pacific War. Japan made Romasha as a self-sufficient force to help the war directly. Romasha had a negative impact on the Indonesian nation even though Japan was only briefly colonized. Many workers are suffering greatly, tired, hungry, thin, poor, sick and dying, because of the cruel and inhumane surveillance and torture.